The present episode that we are going to discuss would be upon the recent trends in the political systems of the third world countries. The topic itself calls for a little bit of an explanation. Firstly, political systems of third world countries in themselves do not form a homogeneous category. That we have discussed in a previous module, that there are perhaps as many different types of political systems as there are numbers of third world countries or developing countries. That's the first part of our problem. The second problem is that when I talk about recent trends, there is no overarching or dominant trend which is visible in the political systems of the third world countries at all. Therefore, we are really at sea to identify what are the dominant trends. Now, in order to make our work a little bit easier, what I have done is, in this episode, I am going to undertake a few indices along which I am going to discuss what are the different trends that are visible, and I am going to compare those trends between the developed countries and the developing or third world countries. By doing this, at the end of the episode, in the concluding part of my episode, I think I will be able to explain to you how the political systems are differing when we are talking about the developed countries and the developing countries. Now, the first index that I'm going to use would be the institution called the state. The state, as we know it, was originally born in the West and is essentially Western in its definition, in its conception, in its entire conceptualizing. Now, the state in Western Europe was formed as a result of a series of treaties that was signed in a place called Westphalia, the peace treaties of Westphalia, which were signed during 1648. That is what led to the creation of the state. At perhaps those of us who have also studied political science from the +2 level, we also defined state with 4 basic characteristics of having a definite territory with a well-defined border, having substantial population, and having a government to manage the conflicts and competitions that arise between members of that population. We also recognized sovereignty as the fourth and the most essential element of the state. In the non-Western countries, however, the state was not born as a result of the peace treaties of Westphalia. Okay, the origin, state did come into being eventually, but the origin of the state, the history of evolution of the state in the non-Western countries is essentially different. Now, besides Western Europe and America, what happened was states were created as a result of the process of decolonization. Now, if colonization is the process of taking over the economy or controlling the economy of a country by a foreign country, a superior foreign country comes and takes over the economy or the market of a less advanced or an inferior country, then we call it colonization. An example would be perhaps the coming of the British East India Company, the French East India Company, Dutch East India Company, etc. When they came over to India and started establishing trade relations with India, that part could be known as, or we definitely would call it as, colonization. That is, a superior country is using the market of a less advanced or less industrialized country for its own benefit. Now, this eventually led to the realization in the minds of the colonizers that if I'm controlling the economy, I'm making a particular amount of profit. What if I could also control the politics of this particular country? If I could control the politics, the administrative system, the law and order situation, then I could maximize my profit further. Now, driven by this very simple logic, colonization eventually led to imperial domination. That is, from being a simple colony, India became a subject of the British Crown after the revolt of 1857. This process of colonization of India, which began in 1600, changed into imperial subjection in 1858. Okay, and India gained political independence in 1947. So this entire period from 1600 till 1946 or before 15th August 1947, India could be broadly said to be under the process of colonization. Now, when I say decolonization, I mean the reverse or the opposite of colonization. Decolonization, therefore, is the process where the colonial master withdraws, the imperial master withdraws from the colony or the subject nation. Okay. Now, this decolonization has happened in about 4 waves. They are known as the 4 waves of decolonization. Each wave has led to the creation of independent countries which have definitely had to struggle to create themselves as states. Therefore, as a result, the states that emerged in these newly independent countries, they did not have origins or natures or features which would be similar to the state in the Western European countries. So the very nature of the state, the way it functions, the way it is conceived, the way it is organized, the way it is looked upon is essentially different in the third world or developing countries from the way that state has existed, has come into being and is still functioning in the Western countries. Political culture refers to the collective attitudes, beliefs, emotions, values that a society or members of a society have towards a political system. In other words, what we feel about our government in very simple terms together would constitute political culture. Now, just like culture, when I simply use the word culture, just like culture cannot belong singularly to a person or an individual, similarly, political culture is also not the political opinion of a single person. That is why I said it is the collective set of beliefs, emotions, values, attitudes that people as a whole have towards their particular political systems. Now, normally it would be easy for us to imagine and believe that in developed countries where political consciousness is very high, political participation is also reasonably high, and there is an entire range of rights and freedoms available to the people, normally the political culture would be stable, would be strong, and it would also be transmitted quite easily from one generation to another through the process which is known as political socialization. And it would almost be equally natural for us to assume that in the developing countries or the third world countries, the political culture, since the political system itself is mostly authoritarian, very rigid, very manipulative, and also most of the third world countries also have politically unstable or volatile political systems, it would be normal for us to assume that political culture in the third world countries or the developing countries would also tend to be volatile, weak, scattered, or not cohesive as such. But here we would be wrong to assume this, because in most of the third world countries, political culture is not based as much upon the laws, policies formed by the government, or the political decisions or economic reforms or social reforms or projects of social welfare that are being undertaken by the government, as much as it is by non-political considerations. For instance, in third world countries, you would be more likely to come across people supporting monarchy or hereditary monarchy, supporting a party simply because for generations that person's family has been supporting a particular political party and a particular political ideology. The kind of trend that India saw immediately after independence, that of Congress system of politics. Okay, for almost 3 decades, though India was going through an open electoral competitive system, we found that the Congress was coming back to power again and again and again. Now, political communication means such communication which is categorically political in its content. For instance, when a party goes out campaigning before the elections, the manifesto that is printed is transmitted to us, or it's reported to us through the various print and electronic media, right? This is a kind of political communication. When we find that certain colleges or college canteens or college walls, I don't know how many campuses still permit that, but the kind of graffiting or political graffiting that happened on canteen walls or postering, etc., whether supporting a particular political party or decrying the ideologies or actions of a particular political party, all this can be seen as components of political communication. In other words, when the leader of the government talks about his plans, future plans for his country, the kind of reforms that he wants to institute, that is political communication. When the leader of the opposition opposes those plans or shows to the people how those plans are actually just plans, that they are worthless, or they might not work, or they might not succeed, or they are not, worth it, okay, that is also political communication. When I express my political opinion through some form of public communication, that is also political communication. Now, if you've understood political communication properly, we would see that in the Western countries, in the liberal democratic countries of the world, the means of political communication are highly free, neutral, uninfluenced by those in power or those against power. Money has very little place, in controlling the content of information or political information that is actually being disseminated to the public. Now, in the developing countries or the third world countries, the picture is quite the reverse. Because of the lack of proper literacy, often we find that lack or low levels of literacy, I would say, we often find that people have to depend more upon visual and oral modes of communication rather than actually reading, because that would require literacy, right? So rather than depending upon books or written literature, the dependence of the common people, the people who are living in the rural or suburban areas, the dependence is more upon maybe radio or maybe the television, etc. Such visual and oral modes which disseminate information, political information, without actually having the need to know or have knowledge of letters. Now, participation becomes political when it is associated with the government. Okay, in other words, when I go to cast my vote, I definitely am participating politically. When I go to attend a rally or a meeting which has a political agenda or is conducted by a political party, then also my participation is a political participation. Definitely, it also includes direct membership of political parties and becoming members of the government itself. So, political participation, very surprisingly, seems to be on the ebbing side, on the lower side, as far as the developed countries are concerned, whereas high political participation or a movement towards ensuring higher political participation seems to be the trend in the developing countries or the third world countries. Now, why this contrasting or contradictory situation? Because we have to understand that in the developed countries, there are already systems or procedures in place which are delivering such goods and services as are required most urgently by the citizens. Now, an American citizen, for instance, would know for sure that whether he goes to cast his vote or not, the kind of public policies and systems that the government is delivering would continue even if he did not go to cast his vote for a particular election. Whereas in developing countries, the political situation is far more complex. B, people are more involved or emotionally attached to particular political ideologies or detached to or from particular ideologies. And C, that most of these third world countries, in most of these third world countries, the government has not been able to institute such structures which function without involvement or incentive or push from both sides, from the end of the public who are receiving the services and goods, and from the end of the government who are delivering these services and goods. Therefore, there is a constant urge to recruit more and more people into political parties and the government, as well as the urge to show support for a particular party which seems to show potential. In the third world countries or in the developed countries, political participation definitely is higher than it normally is in the developed countries, but with a slight twist. That is, in the developed countries, political participation actually happens without any direct manipulation or interference from the government, whereas in third world countries or developing countries, and more so in those countries which are authoritarian or competitive authoritarian in nature, the space given for the people to participate, or the space demarcated for the people to participate in politics, is completely created by the authoritarian ruler. Now, we know that a political party is actually a group of people who have a common political ideology and who have come together basically based on that common political ideology to enter electoral politics. They want to compete in elections. Their main objective is to win elections, and after winning elections, they want to occupy political power and therefore form government. Okay, that is the definition actually of a political party. Now, political parties, once again, in the developed countries of the world, political parties are simply means of acquiring support from the people, because most of the developed countries are democracies, right? Therefore, the political parties are the platforms through which candidates reach out to the common masses, ask for support in the form of votes, and then they form the government. If they win power, they form the government, and if they do not manage to win power, then they form the opposition. Now, the basis of the formation of parties in the developed countries has mostly been purely ideological, okay, whether political or economic, but ideological. In the developing countries, in contrast, we find that political parties have not just been formed on the basis of political ideologies, but there have also been personality-centered political parties. There have been there might have been a family, a royal family, which has supported a particular political party, and therefore around that family and the close associates of that family, a political party has emerged. There might also be such instances where religion is used as a basis for the formation of the dominant political party. Okay, thus we see that the nature of origin and the nature of functioning of political parties in the third world countries is definitely not secular. Now, we are well aware that pressure groups or interest groups are also groups of people, but they differ from political parties because A, they never contest elections, they do not want to win political power, and they do not want to form government. B, that they are representing particular interests. For instance, they might represent the protection of environment, or maybe the need to protect the rights of children, or maybe the need to protect the rights of women, or maybe the need to promote and protect the rights of a particular group of people who are a minority and who might soon become extinct. Okay, therefore their work is to remain outside the government and to pressurize the government to form such laws and policies which would help that particular group that they are representing. Political parties will have a very broad-based agenda, right? They will have certain laws and policies for women, for children, for the economically backward classes, for certain very backward maybe castes or tribes, etc. In short, political parties will try to create a broad-based client base or a clientele. On the other hand, a pressure group or an interest group will identify a particular group and try to represent the interest of that particular group alone. Okay, and it will also try to pressurize the government into forming laws and policies which would be beneficial to that given group. Okay, now as far as the developed countries are concerned, pressure groups or interest groups, as we know, play a very, very important role in let's say USA, for instance, because most of these groups also have an economic agenda. Okay, their functions, their demands to a very large extent determines the kind of policies that are passed in the US Congress regarding economics or regarding politics for that matter. On the other hand, in the third world countries, we find that most of the third world countries have authoritarian governments. Therefore, they do not much look forward to any kind of opposition. Right? Since an interest group or a pressure group is basically drawing home the point that the government is not looking at the interests of a particular group, allowing a particular interest group would mean that it is true that the government is not by itself taking care of children's rights or the environment or women or maybe the LGBT group or whatever, right? Therefore, usually the governments in the third world countries at the very first stretch would like to suppress, by using force or coercion, they would like to suppress the interest groups or the pressure groups. Where suppression doesn't work, the next option for the government is to co-opt or coordinate or include a particular demand group into the government. Okay, this would also help to lessen the impact that pressure group or interest group might have on public opinion, right? And a more recent trend that has been noted amongst the governments of the third world countries towards pressure groups and interest groups is that the government has taken upon itself the job of or the work of creating such groups or such structures which will look at particular interests of particular groups. This has been very evident in China, okay, where the process of state-led civil society or government organized non-governmental sector. That sounds funny. It simply means that the government is trying to convince the people that as a political structure, wherever the government is falling short of looking into the particular interests of particular groups, it has already created other structures by itself to look into the interests of those particular groups. In the long run, the government believes that by doing this, the government is eliminating any kind of resistance or any kind of possibility of a social movement from emanating from or coming from the society at large. Now, based on these indices that we have discussed, we have seen how the situation varies largely between the developed countries and the developing countries. But let me say that within the developing countries themselves, all the countries are unique. I repeat myself perhaps, but all the developing countries or third world countries have social, economic, political and cultural heterogeneity or plurality to such an extent that it is impossible to identify any one particular dominant trend, right? Therefore, we will just broadly use or come to know certain terms that are being used for the third world countries. One such term would be a hybrid state. Now, this term was used first by L. Diamond in an article that he wrote in the year 2000. By the word hybrid states, he refers to those countries of the third world which represented a combination, a chaotic combination of both authoritarian and democratic elements. I have already given examples, but I repeat, Venezuela or Tasmania, they would fall under the category of hybrid states. The next term that is used to represent another phenomena of the third world countries would be that of failed states. Now, how can a state fail? A state fails when it is incapable of exercising its sovereign power. Okay, and this can happen due to various reasons. For instance, in Lebanon, in Rwanda, we find that communal tensions and communalism had risen to such an extent that these states today have been declared as failed states. Another phenomena, that is state predation, wherein, you know, a more superior country, a more developed country is constantly predating upon or preying upon or eating away upon the resources of an inferior country. That has also led to the failing of particular states in the third world, like Nicaragua, like Philippines, etc. Now, besides these two terms, like, you know, hybrid states or failed states, we also find that there are some states in the third world, maybe like India, okay, which do not exactly fall into any of these categories and which are, relatively speaking, better off in terms of democracy, democratic rights, political stability, economic viability. They are better off than many other third world countries. I conclude by repeating myself that though some countries may be categorized and certain overarching trends may be identified in the political systems of third world countries, yet the list is by no means comprehensive or conclusive. Thank you so much.